Weiss and Yang ended up against Flint Cole and Neon Cat. It was a fight he'd seen 100 times before, and he could recite how it would go. That was his excuse for not being there to watch it. Not that Weiss or Yang would accept it. Luckily, he fed Blake a backstory about how his family had asked him to sit with them, which gave him a chance to slip away. As his partner and teammate fought for victory on the main stage, he walked confidently through the restricted section, in yet another uniform purloined from the nearby lockers. I'd best make it up for them for missing their match, he thought, even if he knew they'd win. It was the spirit of the fort that counted. His eyes glimpsed a screen as he walked past a group of workers, many of them having paused to watch it. "Look at them go," one said. "Not sure why you're so excited. We'll be cleaning up the mess afterwards." "Live a little, man. If you can't appreciate them for what they do, you can at least do it for their bodies, right?" "Dude, they're 17, and I'm 19. Cut me some slack." "Oh, I'll cut something if you keep going with that." Jaune scowled and looked up to the screen, his anger dwindling away when he saw Weiss nod to Yang, and the two cover another as they approached their foes. Their teamwork was better than it ever had been before, and he made sure to give them what information he had about the two. They wouldn't be caught off guard by Flint's semblance, and that was his only real ace. Tearing himself away from the monitor, Jaune made his way deeper into the complex. No one questioned his presence, and few could see his face past the cap he dragged down over his eyes. When he approached the server rooms once more, the man spared him a brief glance but relaxed when he entered the key code without incident. Jaune nodded to him and stepped inside, letting the door swish shut behind him. "Good to see they didn't change the code," he said, putting his toolbox down on a nearby table. The room hadn't changed much since his last visit, though it looked like someone had cleaned the place, for there wasn't as much dust. He pulled the chair back before one of the screens and sat down, entering the account he formed before. Nothing popped up to stop him. It looked like his previous entry had gone unnoticed. To be fair, anyone in charge of security was probably looking for more malicious forms of tampering. Frankly, if Vale hadn't been able to notice and deal with the virus on the CCT, then he could have just done about anything. The tower was attacked, for crying out loud, and Cinder left huge chess pieces all over the screens. Who was in charge of Beacon's IT anyway? Port? With Atlas losing their right to handle security, this only gets easier. Then again, this is Almighty Systems, so maybe it would have been the same either way. It didn't really matter. He entered the system and brought up the code, fingers typing in new lines and editing existing ones. It would have taken hours, maybe even days, to find what he was looking for. Luckily, he knew where to look. Exactly where to look. There you are. Well, it looked like Cinder had preempted him. She usually did. It wasn't like she expected anything to go wrong at this point. No one knew who she was after all. She had no reason to doubt that, especially since those attacks on Weiss had been perpetrated by the White Fang. They had reason enough to hate the Schnee family. No reason for that to come back to haunt her. It wasn't like she was dealing with a time-traveling obsessive who remembered every little thing and knew exactly how out of place the attack was. Oh, not at all. "Bad luck, Cindy," Jaune said, entering the final line. He leaned back and smiled, saving the changes and uploading them once more. The service blinked and hummed, but it went up without any problems. Really, she should have known better than to attack someone like that. If you did, you had to make sure you dealt with them thoroughly. Otherwise, people had a habit of coming back to haunt you. He learned that the hard way. Maybe she would hear. Loud cheers came from above, filtering through the walls. It sounded like the fight was coming to its climax, and he'd best be there to congratulate the winners. Jaune stood up and pushed the chair back, opening the door and slipping out with a small nod to the guard there. They didn't question him. Anyone who had the code had the right to be there. or so they thought. It was only once he was in the staff changing rooms that he allowed himself to relax. Another success, though only time would tell if it made a difference. He tossed the clothing into a locker, sealing it and entering some random numbers. It would take a few days for someone to break in, if they even thought it worth the effort. They just assumed it's someone who'd forgotten the code, and he doubted anyone would think to analyze the clothing, let alone test it. He ducked out of the room soon after, and then out of the restricted area entirely. He had a team who needed him. "You came back," Blake said, looking his way with a curious expression. She was sat beside Ruby, but stood and moved over to him. "Weiss and Yang won. I saw. That's why I came over. Figured you'd do your fatherly duties for a change." "Be nice," he teased, reaching up to rub her ears. Blake stepped away before he could, and almost tripped over a chair in her haste. He laughed, earning a glare from her. "Oh, calm down, sweet daughter. I won't pat you if it embarrasses you. I came over because I knew Yang and Weiss would want me to celebrate with them. I didn't expect you to show at all. I told you. My family wanted to spend a little time with me. They came all this way for me. I didn't want to neglect them." That was something he needed to address as well, with what was coming. It was so easy to focus on Cinder and forget them. He didn't want to do that, however. They were his family. For now, there wasn't much he could do. I'll probably be spending some time with them tomorrow as well. Yang and Weiss are through to the singles anyway. That was a few days away yet, since they would only get through half of the double fights today. The other half will take place tomorrow. The singles had been split up too, though not by design. Yang's incident made Beacon postpone the fights. And then, Beacon fell. "Well, at least you're here now," Blake said. A disturbance interrupted her, and they looked over to see Weiss and Yang barreling towards them. Yang barreled, that was. Weiss walked behind her at a more sedate pace. "Here it comes," Blake sighed. "We won!" Yang yelled, clearing the last few feet with a mighty jump. To her credit, Blake tried to escape, but to Yang's credit, she didn't have a chance. She gasped as Yang's arms wrapped around her, crushing the fondness. "Did you see that? We were awesome!" "Yes, we saw," Jaune said, relieved to see Blake had taken the brunt of it. He caught her eye and saw the pleading in it, her begging him to help pry Yang off. Blake was so pleased, she said she wanted to give you a big hug for it. "She did?" Yang asked, looking down at the betrayed girl. "Aw, Blake, that's so sweet." He didn't think Yang believed him for a second, but she knew how to join in on a joke, and quickly smothered Blake's face into her bosom. "My partner has finally shown her love. I'll never let it go." Blake's arms flailed angrily. "This is your fault, isn't it?" Weiss asked as she arrived. Her face held a frown, but it was weak. There was a crack behind it, not to mention how her eyes sparkled with a mix of adrenaline and hard-won elation. "I shouldn't be surprised. You always cause problems like this." He grinned and crossed his arms. "I saw you fight," he said. "You were in control from start to finish. Good work." "We were, weren't we?" Weiss's smile broke through. She gave up the attempt at hiding it entirely, shaking on the spot. "It was a hard fight. Even with what you were able to find out about the man's semblance, he was tricky." She looked up to him from the corner of her eye. "We tried our best, however." Jaune had to hide his own amusement. The way she stood, not to mention her not-so-subtle gaze. Weiss always acted the mature and serene one, but sometimes she showed a little bit of Ruby deep inside. Right now, the look on her face said she was fishing for praise, but she didn't want to admit that. Well, it was his duty as her team leader. was it not? You were fantastic, he said, delighting in the beautiful smile that blossomed. Your strategy was sound. I knew putting you in control would work. Well, it's as you say, I suppose. Weiss's cheeks darkened, but it was more from being the honest praise than anything else. She probably got a lot of fake kudos from people trying to get into her good books. It wouldn't have been possible without Yang, however. I only came up with the plan. It was she who made it work. The old Weiss would have taken her victory as a personal one. To him, the fact she continued to say we instead of I was the real victory. It also showed how much she'd grown. You were both incredible, he praised. Well done, Weiss. He opened his arms with a smile. Weiss divvied for a second and looked around to see if anyone was watching, but quickly leaned in to hug him when the coast was clear. He didn't miss how her hands settled around his waist, or how she breathed deeply of him. He wouldn't comment on it. There was no need to complicate things here, after their date. Things had become easier, happier. Nothing was official, nor would it ever be. But it seemed to have taken a weight off her shoulders. For that alone, he was happy to have helped. Are we about to have a reenactment of your date? Yang asked. Weiss practically threw herself out of his arms. Her cheeks were red, but she still managed to snarl and manage a passable impression of anger. Must you always be so frustrating, Yang? Is it hardwired into your genetics? Yang nodded. You know, I think it might be. Oh, well. I guess that means you can't blame me for it then. It's not my fault. Blame my parents. My real ones, that is. She added, looking to both of them suggestively. I have not yet received a mail about you two trying to adopt me. Oh my, it must have gotten lost, he said. Where did you put it again, Weiss? The shredder, Weiss snapped. Where it belongs. Ouch! Yang winced. You know, I could have been pretty offended there, since I was abandoned by my first mother-in-law. Are you offended? Well, no. Then don't bring it up! Weiss snapped, slapping Yang around the back of her head. Are you trying to panic me? Ow, child abuse? This isn't child abuse. This is discipline. Jaune rolled his eyes at the familiar sight, trusting Blake would break it up once she recovered her breath. He looked to the arena instead, where the roulette wheel was spinning for the next combatant. It was a familiar presence, and one his team didn't need to pay attention to since they were already through to the next round. The first wheel stopped and Emerald and Mercury's faces flashed up on the large display screens. They stood from their seats, making their way out of the arena and down to the changing rooms. Cinder remained behind, feet propped up on a chair in front of her. She fiddled with her scroll, a faintly amused smile on her face. Good for her. The second wheel slowed. It spun for a while, the rapid pace becoming an inching crawl, and then a slow tick. It came to land on Coco and Yatsu's team, and Cinder's smile grew. The wheel came to a stop, and then ticked one last time. The crowd cheered, others whooped, and Penny and Ciel's faces appeared on the big screen, signaling their inclusion in the match. Jaune clapped along with the crowd, his face set in a perfectly neutral smile. Cinder's was not. She was on her feet, hands on the back of the seat in front of her, eyes locked onto the screen. She recovered quickly, sitting down, but her eyes rolled left and right. He looked away before she could bring them to him. Penny, the perfect counter to Little Miss Illusions, or hypnosis. He never found out which it was. Either way, he doubted it would have much of an effect on a robot. Penny didn't have a brain, nor eyes, at least not in the human sense of the term. Whatever Emerald's semblance worked on, he doubted very much that it would have receptors and doodles. Let's see how your little minions work their way out of this one, he thought, and laughed under his breath. If they lost, they were out of the tournament, and thus wouldn't be able to ruin Yang's day. If they won, then it would be only after a brutal fight, one he doubted Penny would lose without some kind of reveal as to her nature. That would save Pyrrha killing her on stage, and Cinder being able to use that to stir up hatred against Atlas. Two potential outcomes, both of which would be a win for him. That was how he liked to take bets. Right now, it was time to slip away before Cinder fought to pin the blame on him. He doubted he could hide his smug smile. Ladies! Jaune slipped between Yang and Weiss, sliding an arm around the latter's waist. You've just won your fight. You've just proven that Team Jazzberry isn't a team to be taken lightly. This isn't the time for arguing. It's a time for celebration. Yang hummed, not at all concerned with Blake's hands under her shoulders, holding her back. Celebration, huh? I could get behind that. What do you have in mind? Nothing fancy. How about we all grab a bite to eat at one of the stores? If we go now, they won't be busy. We'll have it all to ourselves. Weiss and Yang paused to think about it, but agreed after a few moments. He led them away, hands still wrapped around Weiss's waist, heedless of the head she laid on the side of his chest. All he could think about was the look on Cinder's face, and how much he hoped Emerald and Mercury got their heads torn off. They deserved nothing less. It was toward the evening when Jaune slipped away from his team. They stopped for lunch after their fight, then met up with RRNN once the matches were over. He even had a chance to spend a little time with his family, which was equal parts fun and embarrassing, mostly because Sable had definitely welched on his date with Weiss. His mother's face had been nothing short of smug. Now, with the sun set and then back in Beacon, things had calmed down. The crowd of spectators went back to Vale, Amity a floating ghost town for those who worked there. In Beacon, things were sleepier even still, the students exhausted both physically and mentally. He was too, even if he hadn't fought. It was from the plans and the schemes that rolled around in his mind. Things had changed, as they had a tendency to, and he needed to adapt. Mercury and Emerald lost their fight. His eyes lit up, a wide smirk coming out as he basked in the pleasure of the fact. They were out of the tournament. Done. It wouldn't make a huge difference since victory in it had never been a prerequisite for Cinder's plan. But it changed some things. Had to, really. Mercury wouldn't be able to cause Yang's grief via the use of his legs and the illusions from Emerald. It was a small win, and one that might not mean anything in the long run. But if it meant that Yang wouldn't beat herself up and cry, then it was a victory he'd have taken each and every time. It also meant he didn't expose Mercury's legs, which had been his fallback plan had they won. That was lucky since he wasn't sure how to achieve it other than going for the old tripping excuse and dragging the bastard's pants down. Well, that or accidentally causing something heavy to fall on and crush his prosthetics. Both were so obvious Cinder would have likely roasted him on the spot. Skipping the need for it was his lucky break. On the other hand, Penny is still in the competition, and that puts her at risk of going up against Pyrrha. Should I do something to prevent that? His heart said yes, but his mind said no. Penny was a great girl, and she was a girl, no matter her internal systems. The thing was, Cinder needed some grief and rage to motivate the people, and there were any number of places she could get it. If he took Penny out of the equation, then what it was to say she wouldn't have Emerald use an illusion that would force Pyrrha to kill someone else. What if it was Weiss that Pyrrha carved into 10 or more pieces? Well, without Penny's wires, that wouldn't happen. But Emerald would change her illusion to suit. It might be that she could convince Pyrrha to hit a little too hard, a little too high, or maybe take out an eye or kill Weiss altogether. Penny didn't deserve what happened to her, but she was the best suited to taking it. He felt horrible for thinking it, but she was a robot. She could be rebuilt, remade. Other people couldn't. Either way, I've put a spanner in Cinder's plan, but that's all. She'll find a way to fix this. She always does. If he could throw enough spanners though, could he clog the machine her plan was if he gave it too many problems for her to fix? If she was constantly busy making adjustments, would that be enough to force her to delay, or even postpone her plan? He didn't think so, but it was the only idea he had. Killing her would change nothing. He'd done that before. Adam would step in, or someone else. Everything was already in position, for better or worse, and mostly worse. This was going to happen. He just needed to try and limit the damage, if that was even possible. It was that which he was doing now. As he picked his way out of the campus and into the gardens, his quarry sat ahead, on a low-lying wall looking out at the sunset. She often did, although for the longest time, that had been a backdrop to their spas atop the school. It took him a long time to realize Pyrrha loved watching the sun come down. It took him a long time to realize Pyrrha loved his doofus ass too. In a past life anyway. Here, things were very much different. Jaune? Pyrrha asked, confusion in her voice as he walked over and took a seat on the same wall as her. What are you doing here? I wanted to watch the sunset. It's been a long day. You? The same. She chuckled and looked back to it. I didn't realize you enjoyed it. I used to watch this back in my hometown. It's different here, the view. She added, It's nice. He hummed in agreement, watching his old friend from the corner of one eye. Pyrrha wore a small smile, hands in her lap as she sat with knees together and tilted to one side. He knew that posture. It was her relaxed, if a little nervous one. His eyes narrowed. Shouldn't she be more upset? Why did you come out to watch it? He asked. Is something bothering you? No. Why? No. Ah. She didn't trust him. That made sense, he supposed, even if it hurt a little. He had to remind himself that in this life, their relationship wasn't close at all. I just figured you might have been here to get away from your team, he explained. I thought something might be bothering you. I was wondering if I could help. Pyrrha stared at him for a moment, and then turned away to giggle on one hand. Is this the fabled genre concern I keep hearing so much about? I'm flattered. Fabled what? Pyrrha laughed. Dear Ruby always used to tell me how deep underneath that rude and uncaring exterior, there's someone who can't stop caring about other people hiding. She said she could see it whenever you looked at her, and that it reminded her of her sister. She looked away, back to the sunset. I didn't believe her at first, but it's hard to argue with how you and your team act. I was proven wrong. I was happy to be. She glanced back at him. I didn't even expect it to be aimed at me, however. That's why I was so amused. Ruby talks about me? Quite often, yes. I'd have been afraid she had a crush on you if it wasn't for how much she hopes you and Weiss got together. That sounds like her, yeesh. Jaune rolled his eyes. It also sounded like his team to go around telling everyone about how he was with them in private. Nothing was sacred in Beacon. Nothing at all. Why would you be surprised I showed concern to you, though? Pyrrha shifted awkwardly. It's not like we're particularly close, is it? Jaune's smile fell. I guess not. I didn't mean it like that. I used to have a low opinion of you. That was only because of how you always acted. It felt like you didn't care about your team, and you put so little effort into befriending Ruby. She had to do everything, I didn't want her friendship at first. I could tell, Pyrrha said. It made me angry, she sighed, looking away and gripping at the fabric of her skirt. I came to Beacon hoping against all hope that I'd be able to make real friends. And then I saw someone who seemed determined to do the exact opposite. That would have been fine, but for the fact people were trying to befriend you. I guess I felt jealous. Why did this person get so many people wanting to be his friend when he wasn't even trying? Why was it that I had to work as hard as I could just for the same? Ruby wouldn't ever leave you, he said. I know. Or rather, I know that now. I was still afraid at the time, I guess. I thought you were a threat. Or that you'd take her away. I learned what friendship was, and that my team were my friends. She sighed. I also learned how many mistakes I made based on my first impressions. You weren't as bad as I thought, nor was Weiss. I'm ashamed of how quickly I judged people. It was just like her to be so contrite and feel so bad about it. No one was harder on Pyrrha than Pyrrha herself. Probably the reason she achieved so much. Another thing he'd gotten used to helping her fix. With a little laugh, he nudged his arm against hers. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, Pyrrha. First impressions exist for a reason, and everyone judges others based on them. With someone like you, who didn't have many real friends before, you'd have more reason to. Pyrrha stared at him. How did you know I've never had friends? I only told you I came here hoping to make some. Oops. Jaune shrugged. I guess I figured it out from what you said. You do that a lot, she said. What? Analyze things? No. You know things before others do. She eyed him curiously. I'm not sure what it is, but it often feels like you know everyone's darkest secrets. You have this aura around you, not like a normal aura. It's more like you feel akin to an old friend, one that I've not seen for a long time. His eyes widened. Was she remembering his past lives? No. That was foolish. It's not a bad thing, she said. I think it's what makes Ren and Nora so relaxed around you, and Ruby too. You don't feel like a stranger. You treat us as though we've always been there. There's never any doubt you accept us, even if there is doubt as to whether you consider us friends. I consider you a friend, Pyrrha. Her lips twisted up a little. Thank you, she whispered. I think I feel the same. Jaune felt a little comfort of his own at that. It wasn't what they normally had, but knowing she didn't dislike him anymore filled his heart with joy nonetheless. He couldn't blame her for it. Her reasons made sense. For someone who tried so hard to win real friends, seeing him lackadaisically throw his way must have hurt. Now that he had her trust, he could move on to the real reason for all this. I'm sorry, Pyrrha. I didn't just come here to watch the sunset with you. When I came by earlier, it did look like something was bothering you though, he said. He kept his voice even, calming. This was a delicate topic and he didn't want to frighten her away. Has something happened recently? No, not at all. I'm fine. The usual denials. No one with a problem wanted to burden others, least of all Pyrrha. Whenever something is bothering me, I usually don't want to tell people, he said. It's my problem, not theirs. My team and my family showed me how silly that is, though. Sometimes other people can help, even if it's hard to talk to them. I suppose so. Pyrrha looked up to him. Is there something wrong with you? She asked. I'll listen as well if something is wrong, Jaune. I promise I won't tell Weiss or Ruby if that's what you're worried about. Not quite what he meant. Jaune smothered his irritation. Couldn't she grasp his meaning already? He was surprised she was faking her emotions so well. Normally, the maiden business left her shaken to her very core. Was this the invisible girl for Cade? She normally didn't bother with it around him. Maybe he needed a less subtle approach. I was talking the other day with Weiss about memories, he said. That's why she asked me out on a date, because she was afraid of looking back on this and not having any memories of it. I felt the same, I guess. He tried not to look at her. What do you think life would be like if you might end up losing all of those? Losing your memories? Pyrrha sounded surprised and a little confused. That was all. No pain, no anger, no grief. I think it would be terrible, she said. I'd hate to lose the memories I've made with my team. I've come to treasure them. I guess so. Jaune's brow furrowed. Why wasn't she showing any reaction to that? It was her biggest fear, the thing which held her back. His heart beat a little faster in his chest. This was important. He needed to head off her fear of the maiden, her hesitation. It was something he did every lifetime, just to help his friend, the one woman who'd given him the chance to be the man he was today, as opposed to a smear on the emerald forest floor. A leaf fell down from a tree between them, quickly blown away. Autumn is coming, he said, watching her, or fall, whichever season you prefer to call it. Do you like fall, Pyrrha? Huh? I suppose. Pyrrha tilted her head. I never really thought about it. I like it because it's cooler than summer, but also warmer than winter. She laughed. That makes me sound really high maintenance. Don't worry, I'm partnered with Weiss. Pyrrha looked shocked for a second, then descended into a fit of giggles. I won't tell her you said that. Nah, she knows it. He waited for her to calm down, swallowing as to prepare to go for the kill. This was getting out of hand. This was a fear starting to gnaw away inside of him. You like autumn then? He said. I guess that makes you a bit of a fall maiden. Pyrrha blinked and turned to look him in the eye. A fall maiden? She asked. I've never heard someone call it that before.